Fond greetings to senior officials from the Ministry of Finance and today's guests, that is, our industry and trade representatives. May I now request Chief Commissioner, Customs Mumbai, Shri P.K. Agarwal, to welcome Honorable Union Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs with the sapling. Thank you, sir. Now I cordially invite Honorable Union Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs, ma'am, to give opening remarks.
Good morning and namaskar. Like every year, pre-COVID and somewhat in the first year of COVID, we continue with this tradition of post-budget interaction with the industry and business, and that in Mumbai. So I do remember the last time I had come, and probably without the masks all of us could interact. We are here today to carry on with the tradition. And as has been the custom since 2019, at least I can say, the ministry officials are all with us for you essentially to interact. Not that you don't meet them but for this interaction. But certainly this gives us an opportunity, even as the finance bill is in the parliament. The committees are all looking into it, the parliamentary standing committees are looking into it. We are here to discuss and also probably answer some of the questions that you may have in your mind in the meantime. Once the parliament resumes in March, we take it up in the House and have the finance bill passed so that the new financial year starts from 1st April. As you know, this budget has been a budget which has been made for a time where the economy is coming out of the pandemic. The recovery is the one most important thing that all of us will have to focus our attention on. And a sustained recovery, a strong recovery is something which is what all of us would want. And therefore this budget probably gives more space and attention and focus on keeping that growth revival as the priority. And it also has messages for very clear sustainability as our priority. It also has a message of predictable tax regimen. And we continue the good things that we took up last year in bringing transparency to the process of budget making and also accounting. Keep everything on board rather than leave a few outside of the budget. We have also tried balancing the focus on growth, as I said, a focus on a sustained recovery, and keeping the focus on growth meant that we continue with the story of investing in public infrastructure building. I've explained it several times before, it is more to repeat, that spending on infrastructure was chosen as a more favorable route because it ensures greater multiplier effect. And with a greater multiplier, we hope that assets can be created, such assets which can last us for several decades. And also that this budget aims at giving a blueprint for the next 25 years. A blueprint was given last year. In continuation with it, we want to expand it to mean that the Amritkal of India will be the next 25 years leading towards India at 100. And India at 100, all of us have a dream of what it should be, what India should have as its endowment, how our youth, today's youth, moving towards their 20 plus 25, will have an India which they can be happy and proud about living in, and therefore it sets a blueprint for that as well. And in all this process, we are not just talking about today's strengths and challenges, but we are also looking at a future India which will have a greater technological influence in its policy making. Technology which is so required to keep in pace with all that is happening. We saw the facilitation that technology can provide, particularly at a time when the pandemic hit the globe. We thought India could manage many things because of the advantage it had, having adopted the technology in various different ways, payments being one of the top most of them. We could reach people and in their homes, we could give money into their accounts, all because of the way in which technology has been spread and also adapted by our own people. And there is no difference between rural or urban or educated or not so educated, skilled or not so skilled. Technology savvy or not so technology savvy, everyone seems to have easily taken to it. And now we are necessarily building on it. And not only building on just the digital for payment, but also looking at digital for so many other different things, particularly education, filling in the gap which has come in to play because of the COVID, schools being shut, and also making sure that it has a bearing on farmers and so on. So instead of getting into greater details about the budget, I very clearly present to you a blueprint for the next 25 years, priority on growth, not letting go the digital advantage that India has had, and above all, looking for our youth to have their own aspirations met. And that is why, having understood that giving some facilities has made stand-ups and startups prove their worth, we want to build on the strength of the innovation and the capacity to innovate by our youth. So that support which is being extended in the last few years to startups will continue, and that continuation of support to startups, having seen what they can do in the last few years, we want to build on that strength and that innovation that they bring, and that advantage because of innovation that we can focus onto the globe, whether it is in some of the frontier technologies, we want to cash on that as well. So that's where this budget is. I leave this much as an introductory or opening remark, but I suppose there's more verve and strength in the questions and answers and the clarifications and any kind of a, exchange that can happen more than a monologue. So I leave it there. Welcome for all the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for such detailed insights. Now it is time to move towards the next important section, that is interaction with the stakeholders. As ma'am said, the floor is open for questions now. I will read the names of representatives and they may introduce themselves and pose their queries accordingly. Firstly, TV Narendran, CEO and Managing Director, Tata Steel Limited. Mike, please.
Thank you, ma'am. I know we've interacted in Delhi. Thank you for that. Just a couple of comments. Firstly, of course, as we said then, I think a lot what industry has asked for is there in the budget, whether it's predictability on the taxes, whether it's investment in infrastructure. I appreciate that. I think 2 points I want to make. One is you talked about the green transition in some sense. It's obviously going to be very complex, it's going to be expensive, it's going to have socio-economic consequences. So I think there needs to be a 15, 20, 25-year kind of roadmap for different sectors. If you look at steel, for instance, which accounts for 8% of the carbon emission in the world, and India is going to be one of the largest markets as far as steel capacity addition over the next 20 years is concerned. So today's process choices that we are making when we are making investments are not factoring in availability of gas in Eastern India, where most of the steel will get produced, or hydrogen in Eastern India at a price which is viable, etc. So investments are being made in process routes today, which will keep us in that process route for the next 20 years, for instance. So maybe for the next 5 years we can keep doing it. But after that, I think any new investments need to be made keeping this in mind. Otherwise, we will be saddled with legacy assets which are not so carbon efficient, maybe by 2035, 2040, when we want to be closer to net zero. So I think that's one point. We are happy to work with the government to help do the work on that. The second point is on healthcare infrastructure, which again, what we keep hearing is India spending 1.3%. It's higher than what it was in the past. But the expectation is we'll spend 3% or 5%. So one is what the government can and should do, and two is, in your views, what should the private sector be doing to help in this journey? Thank you.
Do you want me to respond?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Narendran. That's a very critical point that you've drawn our attention to. Yes, in some ways, I think, particularly in the context of the fertilizer plant being revived in the east, in eastern Uttar Pradesh, and also linking out with Baroni and other fertilizer plants, the Prime Minister had very clearly highlighted the need for spreading the availability of natural gas for industry and their use. So broadly, yes, that was thought, but in the specific context of steel that you're talking about, I quite take your point, and we will have to go back to see if we can map it in such a way that we are able to understand where more investments will have to go for spreading use of the transitional natural gas. I take your point on that. The second was on healthcare. Well, I'm not playing on the numbers. I'm not taking credit for it is this much now, it was never like before. No, healthcare needs a lot more, not just from the government. Healthcare needs a lot more from the private as well. And when it is the private, it always comes with a request for, can you make it easier for us by either giving us some concessions and so on. So I'm open to all that. But I repeat, we are not claiming, saying, oh, I've spent so much with a sense of, having achieved that level. No, health needs a lot of money, no doubt. I agree.
Sorry. No, that's okay. Just to supplement on the issue of healthcare expenditure. First of all, the figures have to be seen in the context of it's being primarily a state government responsibility. So what the center does is essentially to provide for some cross-cutting national health infrastructure. And it also has now the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which enables the lower middle class and poor also to access private healthcare or public healthcare and reimburses them for the cost. So that takes care of a section of the demand side. For the supply side, there is a 50,000 crore exclusive window in the ECLGS, which was created for building private healthcare with a special benefit if it is done in aspirational districts. So I would urge the private healthcare sector to make use of that window to the extent that it can. And lastly, I would also say that any time we discuss targets of percentage of GDP to be spent on various sectors such as health, education, defense, research and development, we have to remember that any increases there will require an increases in the tax to GDP ratio, and I request the cooperation of industry to increase that also. Thank you.
Thank you. Shri Dinesh Kara.
Thank you, ma'am. This budget, the major advantage which we all see is that it's a consistency in terms of the infrastructure focus, and also, I would say, very, very pragmatic approach towards mitigating the hardships of the economy. more so the industry and more so SME sector. I think it has come a long way. Rural sector, of course, I think if at all there could be some kind of a relief in terms of the way we are identifying the accounts, because rural sector is still in need of some support, though we are trying to extend it, whatever can be done from the banking sector. But yes, of course, I think in terms of identification of the stress which is there in the accounts, if at all there could be some relief, perhaps it would require the intervention from the regulator. Thank you, ma'am.
Shri Puneet Chatwal.
Thank you, ma'am. We interacted a few days ago, but before I say that, let's see how happy I saw people meeting in person in this hall this morning, except for the time when the coffee service was stopped temporarily. So this sector has been hit very, very badly. We all know that. For factors beyond anybody's reasonable control, we all accept that. I think when we talk about growth, when we talk about 25 years from now, when we talk about focus on infra, the one sole demand this sector has had is related to granting it the infrastructure status, which will help it to work at a state level better in getting industry status or getting the benefits of the industry. And eventually, when we think about India at 100, including this sector in the concurrent list of constitution, to support the job growth. We expect in 100 years that the sector will provide 100 million jobs in this field. And everyone has seen and witnessed and is actually talking about it. The pre-conference meeting, anywhere I went and I spoke and said hello to the people, everyone was talking about, oh, now your sector is booming. Oh, now we don't get a room with you. It shows how resilient the sector is, keeps coming up. And especially for those inbound agents who have had zero revenue for 2 years because airports, air traffic is shut. I think positioning of the sector by using different levers outside the budget through the remainder of the year will help the sector, but also the nation, the youth, and contribute significantly to the growth of the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Shri Shrikant Vaidya, Chairman, Indian Oil.
Good morning, ma'am. Actually, today, India is in a very unique situation as far as energy is concerned. The conventional fuels are also on the rise. And today, as I speak, our gasoline demand is already 10-15% more than pre-COVID. Diesel is about 5-7% less. LPG is also 15% more. So as a company, Indian Oil, we are investing in the traditional fuels also because the need is there. I just want to talk about the energy transition in terms of hydrogen, green hydrogen. There was a green hydrogen policy announced a couple of days back. It basically talks of waiving of the levies and duties of the interstate transmission charges so that the cost of consumption of power at the generation point is nearly the same. Otherwise, there was a big difference in terms of levies. But this green hydrogen is a very, capital-intensive business. So I was wondering if, since the oil refiners are the biggest consumers of hydrogen in the days to come, and we'll be making the green hydrogen for a big success, if some budgetary support is given for consumption of green hydrogen, especially in the refining sector, because that's where the first time the green hydrogen consumption will begin. That will be really a big step towards net zero targets. Thank you.
RM Vishaka, MD, India First Life Insurance Company.
Good morning, ma'am, and everybody else from the ministry. I speak as a representative of, as a co-chair of the CIA Committee of Insurance and Pensions, and less as my own company. And there were 2 points that I really wanted to seek your thoughts on, because these have been repeat requests that are being made by CII, and I wanted to understand how you are thinking about it. One is on waiver of tax on annuities. We all understand that the annuity market is something that we really need to encourage with falling interest rates, increasing longevity, and the fact that these are funds that are, okay, maybe I'm not clear enough, and the fact that these provide long-term funds. Annuities is a market that needs to be encouraged. As of today, the tax on annuities actually seeks to tax the principal also and not just the interest. So we really wanted to understand the thought behind not looking at it in continuous budgets. The second one was on, ma'am, we've been having enough interactions on the inadequacy of the PMJJBY pricing. And we were hoping that there's something that's going to come up in the budget, maybe some tax ops, because that's been one of the requests, maybe some subsidy. Because as of now, with the saturation drive, the pressure on the losses of the companies and the capital has just increased. So thought maybe I could get some perspective to be able to understand the situation better. Thank you.
You are saying that we should make the annuities tax-free. Are you saying that? Why? Mr. Narendran will have an annuity. Should it be made tax-free?
So the contours and the details can be easily
No, what I'm
discussed.
saying is the taxation, I think we really need to get this right. If I make money, I may be 80 years old, I may be 90 years old, I may be 10 years old. If I make money, I should pay taxes. If I'm below a certain limit which is tax-free, let it be tax-free. Below 5 lakhs, there's no tax. If you take some exemption, below 8 lakhs, 8.5 lakhs, there's no tax. Now, if you say that I make, like for example, last year we came up with this EPFO. People had corpus of more than 100 crores and they were getting 8.6% rate of interest from the EPFO, which was tax-free. Poor were not getting it. EPFO was meant for people getting salaries of 15,000. So I think this whole logic of trying to get tax exemptions for these items, I think we should get away from it. And as FS had said, we should look at trying to increase our tax to GDP ratio so that we can give other things, important things, some fillip.
So perhaps I did not communicate well enough. Tax on annuities today taxes even the principal, not just the interest. That's the way the tax is. I'm happy to have a meeting and present my case, because this has been something that we've researched and submitted papers on repeatedly for the past 3 or 4 years. So more than happy to have a meeting. This is because the principal is also taxed. There was a point earlier where tax was deferred.
Excuse me, on the NPS, 60% is free.
That's commutable, sir. I'm not talking about commutation at all. Sir, trust me that I really know what I'm talking about.
Then you come back to me separately, we can have a discussion.
Thank you.
Sir, what she's saying is, I mean, there is some merit, because I think there is lack of clarity. I think the issue is that there is lack of clarity. And because of that, at one hand, sir, we have given the tax exemption at the time of the investment. But when it comes to the annuity part, because the way it is structured, there is a principal component as well as an interest component in the annuity. There needs to be a clarity on that. I don't think the intent actually is to tax the principal, but perhaps it may have been done, in some cases by the tax authority. So that point, sir, we need to deliberate in further detail in order to clarify that. We get that point. We'll take it up, from the Department of Financial Services. Please send it to us in writing with the details, and we'll work with the Department of Revenue. That point is well taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Neil C. Raheja, Group President, K. Raheja Corporation.
Good morning, ma'am. Firstly, I wanted to congratulate you on a forward-looking infrastructure-focused budget. Also, it highlighted on the fact of urbanization, the metro, and the urban sector policy which one is creating, and we're looking forward to that coming through. more so because we see 60% of India being urbanized in the next decade. Couple of points we want to highlight vis-a-vis the housing and urban sector. One, ma'am, you've been actively focused on the REIT and infrastructure, REIT and InvIT space. One of the announcements we had seen last year was the announcement of FPI investment for debt in REITs and InvITs, which has been announced by you. However, there is a challenge on the taxation side of it because the withholding tax for FPI is 5% for companies. However, for trusts, it's not clarified. And currently, the T-tax is being deducted at 20%. And hence, no FPI has come into the country on the InvIT and REIT side. So we request if that clarification could be done, that for InvITs and REITs, the same rate would apply to companies. I would believe that was the intention.
Is that a clarification?
I believe it will need a change in the budget.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're asking for a change in the rate.
Yes.
That's fine. We'll take it on.
Since I believe that was the intention. Ma'am, the other point I wanted to highlight, since you're in Mumbai and RBI is also here, I would be hoping you'd be meeting with them. Ma'am, one of the appeal the sector has had right through is that the lending for the real estate space has always been considered a negative and sensitive sector. In some cases, rightly so, because in some markets, real estate has potentially driven up house prices, which has not happened for the last decade and a half, nor has the NPS gone up in real estate. Our request would be is if real estate, rather than being considered potentially a negative sector, the same could be considered equal to any other infrastructure or other sector. For example, ma'am, there is restrictions on dollar financing, there's restrictions on land financing. The risk weightage is 100%, which is equal to a triple B space, although the rating is high. So I request if you could consider RBI to evaluate us and treat us equally. That would be the second. Thank you so much.
There's also one thing, I can only tell the regulator, but the fact is when they do their assessment, it's not just based on the sector's requirement in the economy. Of course, the sector is very critical to the economy, but it's also based on how things had panned out in the last decade. And you also know the government took some extraordinary out-of-the-box solutions to be offered for those last mile completion of projects which were abandoned for over a decade. And if a sector and its promoters, for instance, abandon projects for whatever reason, the regulator will have to look at it from all dimensions. So, and I guess this year and from half of last year, your performance has been fairly good. And I'm sure therefore the Reserve Bank would be able to see that it's not a sector in which risks prevail as much as they prevailed earlier. I'm sure they will be able to do it. I'll have a word with them on that as well.
Appreciate it, ma'am. Thank you.
So regarding the dollar financing for real estate, as we all know very well, 97, 98 Asian crisis, many of those countries had taken recourse to dollar financing because their exchange rates were fixed against the dollar, but their cash flows are in domestic currencies. So I think it's very important that the industry recognizes that even though these kinds of episodes of volatility may come once in a while, but the losses when they occur could be quite substantial. Because of this inherent currency mismatch of the cash flows, it's very important that we put in place enough safeguards and risk mitigation, etc., before we sort of make a case for foreign currency financing for a essentially domestic cash flow generating sector. Thank you.
This budget in particular focuses on affordable housing and two aspects. One, central government working with the state government to fasten and clean up the process of approvals, because from the time first investment into land happens till the first unit is sold, there can be a gap of several years, and that adds to the cost. So that's one clear area. The second, budget also announces that working with regulators to bring down the cost of intermediation. The point which I am making, as far as assigning weight for the risk is concerned, that is a separate aspect. But the cost of intermediation, which is controllable item, that is something we government expect to have that conversation.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Ujjwala Vemparala, Founder and Managing Director, Bot Organic.
Hi, good morning, Your Excellency, Mrs. Sitharaman. I'm Ujjwala Vemparala, founder and CEO of Bot Organic and Russ Organic. We produce cold-pressed organic beverages and also organic products. I was extremely delighted to see in the current budget for chemical-free farming across the country, along with your announcement of zero-budget natural farming. As an organic cold-pressed juice company, I would like to thank Your Excellency for this great initiative. I have a few requests. The first being, can the Government of India provide lower GST for certified organic food products and beverages, and to encourage organic food production and processing? The second would be, could the government look into introducing a sugar tax on beverages to discourage the use of sugar for a better, healthier India? The last being, food processing units are given credit-linked cap subsidy at 35% for 5 crores. However, they have to wait for approvals before setting up units. Could this be modified to give such a grant to given already existing units? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Shri M.K. Agarwal, Managing Director, Grasim Industries.
Good morning, ma'am. My compliments to you for a very delicately balanced budget. You have managed so well to manage the needs of current situation from COVID infection to our future growth for next 25 years. And especially for the textile industry, as I represent textile industry, PLI scheme has been a great boon, and also the mega parks, mega textile parks which have been announced under Prime Minister's scheme will be a big boost to the textile industry. So in this connection, I have a few suggestions. So PLI scheme is very good for long-term investment and it will create a lot of demand. But also PLI industry can link with the available raw materials within country. Otherwise, it may so happen that the end PLI industry government may import most of the raw materials from outside, and the domestic available raw material may not get the traction. That is one. Second is the GST, which is still inverted for the textile industry. The basic raw materials still attract 18% GST, and the subsequent value chain has lower GST of 12% on yarns and fabric, and also 5% in some cases. So that blocks a lot of working capital for the downstream value chain, which can be easily avoided. And third, a big need will be there for skill development of the textile workers in all aspects of the value chain. So that aspect deserves much greater attention of the union government. Of course, the private sector also chip in, but that will be a big demand for the textile workers. Thank you.
On the tax, do you want to expand on? Although the fact is, that's exactly what we wanted to correct. And that's the inversion which is hurting all of us. And it was a conscious decision taken by the GST Council after having deliberated it over 3 different council meetings. But then we had to wait for longer and said, all right, we'll give some more time and correct it. Otherwise, not so well corrected, but corrected nevertheless, saying, all right, we'll retain the status quo. So the voice of the industry is also sometimes this way, some other times that way. And within the industry, there is a request saying, correct the inversion. And some other time the industry says, no, not yet, don't correct inversion, please bear with us. So I'm happy to hear this voice. But there was equally a different section which told us, no, they are not ready for it yet. And therefore, we had to go to the GST Council, hold an extraordinary meeting, and take a call saying we won't correct the inversion, although the correction itself is required for the PLI. Otherwise, the investments are not going to come in certain areas. Well, reality is, I suppose, we'll have to wait for it. Then I'm sure Tarun will be able to add more on it. The other issue about raw materials which are available in India and having to buy them, I'm fully with you. We need to first of all be able to use the raw material which is available in India rather than seek to import. However, there are voices, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of this way or that way. There are voices which say even that little restriction that we had brought in terms of duty on the import of a certain type of long staple cotton. Long staple cotton which is not grown in India, and people were wanting to buy, import long staple cotton because some of the blended fabrics require that. But we've retained the tax, although there is a demand saying, no, allow us import. The moment you allow import of a specified variety of, say, cotton, even that is perceived, for instance, as why are you importing when we grow? We don't seem to grow that particular staple length. But still there is this. There is a lot of, I feel, and I feel sad about it, there is always a perception battle in every decision that you take. And equally, the decision taken is not studied in full much before people comment about it and forcefully ask for a retraction. So I think all this will have to become part of a discerning debate on an issue rather than a passionate reaction. I take both your points well, but then our recent activities probably don't answer your concerns. But Tarun.
Mr. Agarwal, thank you so much for saying that. The FM has already replied to your textile thing. Actually, what from the government side or from the, what we have noticed is that there are conflicting interests. So here the trade wanted that the tax rate not be, maybe they also did not understand the complete implication because there's a lot of embedded tax already built into the system, as you say. If the inputs attract lower tax and the outputs attract higher tax, it will get embedded. But here I'll make a request to the industry bodies and the industrialists that I think you also need to come out very openly and speak up, because that will give us also the strength to handle those, and others will also know that there's another perspective. Because the day we were doing it, there were people who told me that maybe the trade may be happy, but the manufacturers, which is our main focus, the PLI, that we want to become a manufacturing hub and textile is the most important part. So I think, happy to hear this voice, but I think we need to hear more voices, and we'll keep trying and keep working on that. On the chemicals, the second point that you mentioned, I'll be most willing. This time we have, on the customs duty at least, I can say that is how we have been working on, trying to see what we have to encourage manufacturing within the country, or and what we should allow for imports. And we have done a very extensive discussions and also crowdsourcing comments from industry and the others. So if you still feel that there is something more that needs to be done, you're most welcome to get in touch with me, to get in touch with us, send me an email, and we'll be happy to have a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Shri Rahul Bajaj, Director, Fun Factory Toys Private Limited.
Honorable Finance Minister, good morning, and I thank you for the opportunity given us to present this sector. As you are aware, that the toy manufacturing has a large potential for exports, as well as giving employments to women specifically. I would request if the government can set up an R&D for the toy sector specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Shri R. Mukundan, Managing Director, Tata Chemicals Limited.
Good morning, ma'am. Firstly, congratulations on a wonderful budget. And actually, I was telling Mr. Tarun Bajaj, there's nothing much to request or speak to you about specifically on the budget proposals. There are some procedural issues which I will send to him directly. But only one point I wanted to say, there was a lot of emphasis in the budget on digital. There was also emphasis on sustainability. I represent Employees Federation of India as well as the CII Committee on Labor and Industrial Relationship. One of the things we have observed in the last 2 years has been the women participation in workforce has sharply declined. And while framing these policies of government, if you could also bring in an element of how can we encourage women participation more, it will be a very useful step, and maybe that's something which we should take up. At the board level and all, now there are some regulations which have come, but I think within the corporate sector, some guidelines, some best practices, I think it will really help us to move forward. Thank you, ma'am.
I'll be more curious to know, at least in the formal sector, what is your understanding of what caused this decline, if at all? You're saying there is a decline in women participation. What is your understanding? What caused it?
I think this whole lockdown and when the people started sort of reducing workforce, I think it probably impacted them more than others. That's our anecdotal view. But in any case, I think if jobs are our key issue, our view is that we should also keep a focus on diversity. If you ask, for example, when we recruit in campuses today, we recruit almost 50% women engineers, which we are now finding increasingly are coming through. But I'm only saying when designing this, when government looks at policy in terms of digital sustainability, maybe we should add a third angle of diversity. That was a broad suggestion.
But how many others would want to participate in this particular issue? Do you all have any particular view on women's participation, what's actually happening now, and also how best we can do things to improve women's participation? Because it's one thing for the policy to be done, which I'm not against. Whatever is necessary, we should always do. But I want to ask of you, you create jobs. You're the ones who take a call at the board. You're the ones who find through your board decisions that certain things are changing. And if COVID is the time when we've got to be looking at decision making in terms of the way in which we do our businesses, and if diversity is one of the things on which all of us will have to apply our mind, I'd like to ask of you, is there anybody else who wants to participate in this? Is there any input anyone else would want to add in? Narendra?
Ma'am, a couple of points. We've also been trying very hard. One is there are lots of states which still don't allow women working 3 shifts. Okay, so we're working very hard to say that we'll take care of their security and everything else, allow them to work. Because what happens in a manufacturing organization is, if you can't deploy women in 3 shifts, then they are very limited to the roles they can play. It's not about getting women into the offices. That's easier to do. But getting women on the shop floor, and there are many skilled women, there are many qualified women who are happy to work on the shop floor. So this is one thing we are working, and the states that we operate in, we certainly have this challenge. We are doing that. I think Gujarat doesn't have that problem, but some of the other states have that problem. Second thing is, while private sector is providing care wherever required, because the other thing is particularly women with children, child care. So you can do it as a company, but as a community, as a society, we need to create that infrastructure. And maybe private sector can play a role in building it with the government. But I think that is there because otherwise, again, women go out of the workforce when they get married or when they have children, etc. And that support is not there. Today, we rely on the extended informal family to take care of that, and that may not be practical for many contract workers, for instance. So as companies, we can do that, but I think there needs to be a bigger role. So I think the third part is, of course, and that's very important, to protect them in the workplace. And I think we see a lot of that, particularly when you have contract workers. They are very vulnerable, and as organizations, we need to play a role in protecting that. So a large number of things need to be done. And on diversity, I think we're going beyond just women. We are looking at how can you get transgenders into our workforce, etc. So I think there's a lot we can do. Private sector is happy to play a role, but I think in some areas we do need that policy support from government and the infrastructure support that is also required.
Good morning, ma'am. What we have seen is we were funded by ADB, DG, FMO and Proparco. And in the last 10 years, they have lot of encouraging policy. They monitor you not just on your financial performance, but on gender neutrality. So to manage our gender ratio, what we did is we were the first one to, during the COVID, to allow women to continue to work from home because of younger kids and give them flexible working hours. And in campus interviews and campus recruitment, we give them 20% variation. So like they can be paid 20% higher than the male counterpart, and if they have 20% lower score also, they can be hired. And on the sites and remote...
What score?
Like if you are doing the campus recruitment, if the common score to hire is 80, for women we are allowing 20% lower score to be hired, and then you do the performance improvement plan from the beginning. And this all have changed actually our ability to recruit women employees, and also the cultural dynamics in the organization has improved a lot. And we are seeing lower attrition and work culture improvement also. So I agree with Narendran when he was saying that there should be some policy. We were encouraged and taught, and there was a financial reward from multilateral, and it has become a part of culture now, that every departmental head has a motivation to maintain the gender neutrality, otherwise his KRA gets impacted.
So ma'am, what I will do, we have got some set of policies which other countries have implemented positively through ILO and others. We'll put it together and send it to you for your consideration. It will only be an encouragement. I think it's a positive encouragement we must do. The alarming decline is what has caught our attention, and we want to sort of do whatever we can in that direction. Thank you.
This is more a clarificatory question from my side. There are obviously things that need to be done. Now, if there are things that the government, through its regulation, is preventing you from doing, then it would be good if you are specific on what those things are. Third shift, women are not allowed in certain professions. That is very clear. That requires government intervention. Some of the other things that you are seeing don't require government intervention. You are now seeking a government regulation on something which is unregulated. If that is what you want, you should be very clear, and it shouldn't become like CSR, where people said CSR, oh, why do you have a regulation? Why 2%? Why not 1.5%? Why not 3%? It was all very well until the regulation was promulgated. Many people asked for it. After it came, everybody says, why is government regulating this CSR? This should be left to us. So would you like a reservation policy for women in the corporate sector? Would you like reservation policy for other weaker sections in private sector? You have to think about this clearly as to what you want before you ask for it. Because if you're not clear, then you will get something which may not be what you have been asking for. And you should be very specific. That's my request to you, because I was in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs when the CSR regulations were being debated. And at that time, everybody said, yes, yes, industry must do CSR. We should all do more CSR. And some of the progressive companies would come into fora like this and say, we have done this. Everybody should be doing this. Government should intervene. Then government intervened and prescribed 2% for certain classes of companies. Now I continuously hear, why is government regulating this sector? This should not be done by government. We are ourselves very, advanced and progressive corporates, we will do it. So I think you should be very clear. If there are restrictions from government, then that is an agenda. But if there are new regulations where it is unregulated, you want us to regulate, then let us have a consensus that you want us to introduce regulations in that field.
So there's no one else who's coming into this issue, right? All front benchers. Women are not a problem at the back.
Ma'am, not wanting to come in the issue, I think this is one aspect where from a governance perspective, I agree with Mr. Somanathan, it's to the industry in each one of us on how we encourage diversity in our workplace. But from a corporate governance point of view, I think Scandinavia, Holland, Germany, Switzerland, etc. have made very good advances like 20 years ago. So I think if we had more women in board positions, and even as a requirement, the rest will just follow.
Sorry, this is another thing on which I have my personal experience with which I will say with confidence. Get me those kind of women who can be put in the boards. Where are they? I've actually made a lot of attempt at my own level as a minister in calling up some people and saying, please, would you not want to come to a board? We want your experience. We want your presence. No, I've not had enough women coming. So there is a serious issue. We recognize that. But the solution is what has got to be achieved. Like the way you say, that's got to be achieved. But what are the ways? Tell us that. So, yes, these are absolutely critical topics that all of us should talk about, think about, and also keep those end results that we so desire before us. And all of us will have to apply our mind.
I don't know what has been your experience of having more women in your organization. While FM was speaking, I just thought I should mention this. In my CBDT board now, I have a majority women, and I find it much better, much easier, and a lot of other perspectives that come up. So I find it very nice that the women really brings balance to the thinking process. So I don't know what's been your experience. I think we ourselves should work for it.
Thank you for the active participation on this topic. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, thank you to my friend Mukundan for raising the topic. I think it is a matter and should continue to be a matter of some vigorous debate. And the fact that so many people, both from here, from the floor and from the dais, including Honorable Minister, have spoken, I think speaks volumes in itself. When it comes to women on boards, I think we have made tremendous progress. We have gone from 3.5% female representation in Indian boardrooms to close to 20%, largely due to legislative and regulatory support, Companies Act and then Kotak Committee. Can we make more progress? Absolutely. Women are 50% of the world's population, so why not 50% of everything in every sphere, boards included. So I think we're making good progress on boards, maybe more can be done. The issues that emerge on factory shop floors and so on are, in my view, and this is my personal view, more attitudinal, more social. And all organizations, individuals, including government, we live in the context of our society. So sometimes social attitudes also have to change to enable both government and industry to make change, whether it's on the shop floor or in the boardroom. So just a couple of points here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for active participation on this critical topic. I'm sure Ministry is definitely awaiting proposals from all the industry leaders on all the critical topics. Next, Ms. Ruchita Savan, founder and delight specialist, Ashrang Delights.
Good morning and a very warm welcome. I'm Ruchita Savan from Ashrang Delights and I'm a baker and mine is just a startup. I just wanted to ask, government has passed such a good schemes for women entrepreneurs in this budget. I really appreciate that. I just want to ask, how will government ensure that they will get hassle-free loan?
I know. The suggestion is Mr. Kara should answer on behalf of all the banks. You know, actually speaking, hassle-free loan for anybody, and yes, more so for women. Our Prime Minister has said, look, I am the security behind you, please take loans, you don't need to give a security, please sit down. And so on. And that is where in Mudra or in Swanidhi, for absolutely the poorest of the poor who are doing the little businesses, he told the banks, look, I'm the security behind them, don't ask any security, give them the loans that they want. And actually speaking, the performance in terms of servicing the loan is very good. Now, over and above that, hassle-free, Mr. Kara, the opportunity is yours.
No, very often for the startup, more than the loan is actually the equity requirement. So I think as far as loans are concerned, we are more than happy to support, provided they have enough equity with them. Thank you.
Mr. Kara, you need to provide more...
No, of course, for that matter, as rightly mentioned, the CGTMSE and those kind of schemes, they are very much being encouraged. What is actually being done now at our end is that we are trying to make it end-to-end digital, so that what is mentioned in terms of hassle-free, that is something which is being addressed. Right from the filing of the application to the decision making, everything is done through the decision engines. So that will make the life much easier. So this is already a work in process, and I think maybe another 2 months or so, as far as we are concerned, it will be all digital. Thank you.
That was an innovative baker, right? You're in bakery, right? You're an innovative baker startup who's asked that question.
Yes.
And initially, Mr. Kara gave a very bland answer for that. And then after being prompted somewhat, he went into talking about a scheme which has a lot of government support, CGTMS. No harm. And I am conscious that I have a very new, enthusiastic Secretary, Department of Financial Services. So I won't go beyond this in talking about the banks, because I'll have Mr. Sanjay Malhotra saying, no, my banks are good. I support them. But no, banks will have to be a lot more customer friendly. Not to the extent of, taking adverse risks which you don't need to take, but you need to be a lot more friendly to the customers.
I have a few more.
See, this is an area which is so absolutely interesting and critical. You have DPAM secretary wanting to say something, taxation man wanting to say something. Let's all hear them out. Yes, Tuhin.
Ma'am, I think this is a question of, the support to the group entrepreneurship and the individual entrepreneurship. In fact, in terms of group entrepreneurship, the self-help movement, the self-help groups have done tremendous amount of progress in many, many states. That means women coming together and working out small things, and banks have been supporting. And in terms of support, governments have been putting it together, and millions of women have actually come out of their houses and then managing, small business in a group manner. Now, how do we really, in case of course, when you have individual entrepreneurship or individual thing, you have this typical equity requirement and other things, where probably, but I think we can learn from the group activity and say how that particular movement, which has been so successful, and how we can also translate into other areas of entrepreneurship.
Again, I'll address Mr. Khara more. No, madam. Mr. Khara is a good friend of mine. That's why I'm pinning him down. So Sanjay is new to the sector. But one good thing which has happened in the past few years is that the balance sheet, both of the banks and the corporate sector, has started looking up. And I think we have this desire that while we should be growing at 9.2% in the current year, our growth rate should be high enough in the coming years, and it is only then can we do something to the economy. So my request as a leader of the banking sector to Mr. Khara would be that you really need to work out some system that we actually push credit into the economy. And because this is one thing which keeps coming to us, and it comes to me. I have spent good 5 years in the department. So I think we should do something, and I would request you to take the leadership, being the chairman of SBI, to see that in the next 2-3 years, we are able to address these issues of the entrepreneurs, of the medium MSME business and the large business also. I just wanted to make that small comment.
If I'm allowed to say only 2 minutes to speak for this on this subject. Normally it is perceived that the banks don't sanction the loan. Today my situation is that in 1 quarter, my underutilization of the working capital limit has come down by about 900 basis points. And still at that level also, the underutilization of the working capital is as high as 52%. That's one point which I just wanted to bring it to the notice. But yes, of course, what is mentioned in terms of hassle-free loan, and that is something which I wanted to emphasize, that I think up to 5 crore rupees or so, that's the benchmark which we have kept for ourselves. We have ensured that it should be end-to-end digital so that whatever hassle comes, the fact of the matter is that when it comes to SME, for us, the best way out is to have a credible cash flow. And if at all we can have access to the credible cash flow, the lending becomes very easy. And ma'am, with that in mind, when it comes to our retail loans, it are growing, that is growing at about 16% per annum on a CAGR basis. But when it comes to SME, we were actually facing problem because all this while it was a balance sheet based financing, and balance sheet based financing, it has got its own challenges which you have seen. Of late, the ecosystem has undergone a change. There is a definite improvement in the behavior of the borrower also. It's more of a responsible borrowing which has been seen, and that is something which is actually reflected. But nevertheless, for hassle-free, this I believe is the way forward. If at all we'll have access to the cash flow, credible cash flows, the lending becomes very easy, and I'm very confident the kind of experience which we have in personal loans, because of we have got credible bureau scores available. With that, if at all we'll have access to the credible cash flows, perhaps the growth for the SME would be as high as about 16%, as I envisage. Thank you, ma'am.
If the suggestion is superfluous, I'll be very happy. One of the important elements of hassle-free loan disbursement is the availability of loan documentation in multiple local languages besides English. And the second thing which banks can now try to make use of is the account aggregator framework much more actively. Again, if it is happening at a good pace, I'm very happy to hear that. If it is not, that should also take care of much of the information gaps that exist and facilitate greater availability of funds, credit or equity, to startups and other potential borrowers. Thank you.
Topic has generated a fair amount of discussion, and I see some common theme against this issue of hassle-free participation of women, policies about green and how do we move forward. A very significant part of the budget which declares the direction in which government wants the economy to move is on ease of doing business 2.0, ease of living, reducing cost of doing business. Do not treat it as an item of compliances on the face of it. That was what government and industry regulators put together did in the past 2 years. Now we have to look at it in a more granular level, sector by sector. How can a combined effort can lead to improving productivity? It is not just about putting capital, it is not just by saying that some tax accommodation, it is looking at each aspect. If women participation is less, ease of doing business, there are issues around it. If cost of intimidation is high, I am sure the procedure part, the hassle part, it also adds to the cost. Now in the coming months, relevant parts of the government, not just a single ministry, relevant parts of the ministry will be reaching out to their stakeholders, talking to them that what are the elements which are putting it back, more investment, higher productivity. So that is my request would be that please engage in those conversations, and that conversation will lead us to Indian economy moving towards not just higher investment but also higher productivity, and that's how we reach to the better path. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Shri Shankar Shinde, Chairman, Federation of Freight Forwarders Association, India.
Respected ma'am, good morning. My name is Shankar Shinde, Chairman, Federation of Freight Forwarders Association in India. First of all, I would like to thank you for the well-presented budget and more stressed upon the logistics sector. So this is the first time we have been experiencing on the logistics sector where the emphasis is given upon the development. But ma'am, when we see this importance given to the logistics sector being the backbone of the economy, we would like to bring it to your notice some of the important aspects which we would like to have is, one, this logistics sector where we see that PM Gati Shakti is very well drafted on the last mile connectivity. Yes, well presented. We really appreciated the PM Gati Shakti initiatives. And with that, to promote this Atmanirbhar Bharat in logistics sector, and the logistics companies in India, which are majority from the MSME sectors, they need to be supported and strengthened. Because we see there is a lot given by the government for the customs, digital customs, gone fantastic, wonderful way to support the industry and the trade. But to support this, the logistics company, the custom brokers, and the sector needs to be strengthened and encourage or leverage. If this industry can be provided with the industry status, I think so, ma'am, we are not asking for the subsidy, but we are asking if this can be supported with the industry status, surely it can get into the banking finances. Because this comes with a lot of investment with the technology and the advanced technology which is being implemented into this sector. And if we do not encourage or strengthen this industry, the MNCs, multinational companies, with the low cost of finance would come here, and the protection of the local industry would be a concern. So to protect this industry from such, we need to emphasize upon the supporting to the industry with various aspects. The other thing, what is a lot talk about is carbon emissions. If there can be a plan come out as to how these carbon emissions can be implemented by shifting over the pollutions from road to rail, rail to air, and this can be converted into the benefits to the scripts or some other way. So it can also boost and help the industry in the larger aspect. So this safeguarding the industry is very important, ma'am. The capital cost leveraging into this industry is very important. And the skill development and professionalism, where NSDC is really taking concern about this, we still require more emphasis upon it. And the digital technology which has been implemented in the industry, we see the lot of welcome, it is a welcome move for the women entrepreneurship, or the welcome move for them to come into this industry. And this is a good gesture, because this industry had a lack of participation from the women's participation, and we have specially opened up the women's wing in the industry to empower women into entering into this industry. So with this, I would like to stop here and leave it here. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Next, Sri Sunil Sangai, founder, Nova Dhruva Capital.
Ma'am, welcome back to Bombay. We met you 2 years ago when you had done similar kind of conference. First of all, my compliments on the budget, particularly the budget and the post-budget announcements. I come from the capital market. I also represent FICCI excuse me, on the capital market. So not only budget announcement, but subsequently the announcements by Reserve Bank of India and all of that actually gave a lot of comfort to the market, which you would have seen. There are two factors, ma'am, which are consistent as we see in the budget. One is the continuity from the previous years, particularly on the taxation, which is very important from the capital market side. In fact, this is one of the shortest Part B speech which we have seen in the budget, in the recent budgets. And the second is your focus on digitization. Almost every class of assets, including the land, including other things, you are trying to digitize, which is good because ultimately the transaction will happen, it will come in the capital market. There is one asset which is still left, and in some form, if that can be digitized, that will also be added to the capital market, that is gold. So my summation is that some work has happened at the Ministry of Finance level. If that can be pursued further, If gold can also be digitized, it will add a lot, another class of asset in the capital market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next is Ms. Dakshita Patil, founder, Finding Sparrow.
Thank you. I come from advertising, art and design background. I'm a founder of Finding Sparrow. My name is Dakshita Patil. My concern is not literally about the this budget, but is about the budgets of the projects that come out, advertising and filmmaking industry. They have gone down drastically after pandemic especially. So, and the expenses that has to go into it are the same. So what can we do about it? Is there any limitation that we can have in the future?
I don't think I have any instant answer for it. Okay. In a way, all of us have borne the brunt of the pandemic, like the way hospitality.
Next few years, we'll be able to compete with the brown hydrogen and brown ammonia. And if we go through the current prices, probably with banking and wheeling, we will be competitive to brown, but because oil and everything is at a much higher rate. So if government can also consider announcing a roadmap, like for polluting industry, like say for example steel, fertilizer, etc., that when it's competitive, the new capacity should have some provision to say blast furnace being used by the green hydrogen or many other industry. And also we have 75,000 megawatt of group captive plant on thermal, and most of it is subcritical. And they have a station heat rate of 2,500 to 3,000. So they are extremely polluting. They can't be retrofitted to comply with the new norms. So when we are approaching those companies, they are saying there is no depreciation policy, etc., to write down those capex. So if government can examine if it makes sense to encourage the government's greening policy to look at discontinuing this subcritical plant faster, as you have considered for the PSU and the state sector, the similar thing should be considered for the private sector as well. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Shri Gaurav Somwanshi, co-founder, Emertech Innovations.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful opportunity. So me and my co-founder over here, Vikas, are working in a blockchain-based startup over the past 3 to 4 years, even before the fad came up. But our entire focus has been to how to use blockchain, not for crypto or NFTs, but basically bringing trust and transparency across the supply chains. We have already deployed it for over 15,000 farmers in the Nashik region at Sahyadri Farms, and now trying to explore how blockchain can also bring transparency into the circular economy. But given the new, you could say, a lot of back and forth is happening regarding how the tokenizations will be viewed, and whether or not the technology should not face a collateral damage because of some of its use cases. So I think if more clarity, because the technology itself is growing at such a fast pace that it's impossible to, even for the people within the field to keep up with it. But now it's pretty much clear that we are moving towards Internet of Blockchain, if I could use a word by one of the scientists. So just would like to, have some of your, hear some of your thoughts on this. Thank you so much.
I think I want to make it clear that the government's policy towards blockchain has nothing to do with the government's policy towards crypto assets. They are, so there needs to be no apprehension whatsoever about anyone using blockchain in an area which has nothing to do with payments or currency. In fact, the government itself, for example, the Coffee Board under the Commerce Ministry, has launched an initiative. I think you are doing something similar on farming. So they have a blockchain system for identifying specific varieties of coffee from specific fields so that they drive a higher price when they're sold in export markets because they have a proof of origin as to it's coming from a particular variety in a particular hill in Karnataka and it fetches a higher price. So I want to make it very clear, government has nothing against blockchain technology and there's no connection between the two. Blockchain is an important technology and as the budget itself mentions, the central bank digital currency itself will be based on a version of blockchain technology. So there is no apprehension about blockchain as a technology. It is about a particular use case, as you have correctly described it, in the area of so-called crypto assets or virtual digital assets. But it doesn't apply to blockchain as a technology. The government is in no way discouraging blockchain as a technology.
Thank you. Shri Jayant Patil, Whole-Time Director, L&T Limited.
Ma'am, as previous Defence Minister, I used to be the President of Society of Indian Defence Manufacturers. Thanks a lot, and I must tell you the entire Defence Ministry is extremely happy that you made two announcements in the budget. One was about 25% of the R&D, which government funds now going to the industry startups. The question essentially, there was not enough clarity at that point in time. We need to really know who will administer it, because that's essentially where it will make a big difference as to whether it truly will reach the industry. Second related point in this is the SPV model also you talked about for working with DRDO. That again essentially relates to the same R&D, and that's essentially again whether it's the industry driven programs which we are required to go to the DRDO or it's DRDO's program which they'll take us as members. A third very small point and very relevant for unlocking a lot of our working capital. On a same PAN number, when we register across states, my own L&T Defence operates at 7 states. We have a lot of credit which lies in one place. The ledger balance from one state to other state, why can't we transfer? The other related thing, obviously, if it can't be transferred across states, can my other operations of Larsen & Toubro, being a mega group, be using some of those within that state? Again, the PAN number remains one. Because as a corporate, we are one single PAN number organization. I'm sure this affects many other corporates. I'm just probably voicing that. Thank you.
On the defense, I think quite a lot of discussions have happened. Please sit down. Quite a lot of discussions have happened since my time there. And we had ensured that the Defense Ministry, for each of their bids, will be the one which relates to the industry. And that's what we did even when we chose about 200 items to be given for the small manufacturers within India. So it will be the Defense Ministry which will have to deal with it. But I certainly will talk to my senior colleague Rajnath ji and see if I can have them relate to you all and explain things where there is a issue. Because both the questions that you've raised, both one of the who's going to do it and also the SPV, I think enough groundwork has already been done. It will be the ministry which will get you the clarificatory notifications and everything else. But I'll certainly remind them, because the issue on DRDO or you having to work together with them, is it their project or is it anything which is being projected by the private industry also, is something which they'll have to explain. I'll ask them to do it. But as regards the taxation issue for one PAN card but across the states and profit or earnings being made in one, what happens to the other? It is in a way also related to GST in that it goes across the states. So I would definitely go to them, but before that, if Tarun has anything to add, he can.
This point that you mentioned about the same company in 42 different states. And there's some discussion going on, but because GST is a very interesting thing. We can't decide, states can't decide, we decide together. And then we have this committee system which actually evaluates the process. So this is happening in one of the places I've gone through. I am not quite conversant with the details, but if you have anything, any suggestion, I would request, please send it to me.
You know, in this context, using this context, I'd like to just, for the welfare, I'm sure many of you are seized of this matter. When it comes to indirect taxation related to the GST, it's one thing when you address the issue to me or to any finance minister from states. But Tarun actually captured it. The decision is not made by the central government. The decision is not made by any one state finance minister. It is the GST, which is a fantastic body consisting of all the states and the center. The center is also just a 1/3 participant in it, which has to take a call. But more often, for whatever reason, knowingly or unknowingly, when we try to tarnish the GST for whatever agenda, we are undermining the institution which has been created with all the states on board. Very knee-jerk reaction saying, oh my God, GST is now become the famous words of one of the opposition leader, Gabbar Singh tax. We are disserving our own country's institutions. Teething problems can be there. It has to be taken up over and over again. Several iterations happen about one issue, and post which a system works. So in this case too, I'm sure we'll take it up and talk it in the states, the GST Council, but because you addressed to me, it doesn't become a central government's issue. At the same time, I'm not saying it's not a central government's issue where I can't, no. These things will have to have a lot more calibration in discussion, which is most often missed out on. So I thought I'll take this opportunity to put it.
Thank you. Because of the constraints, now we'll have to take the last one question. All others, I request, please write down your queries and hand it over to us, or you may email the same to us. We'll try to reach out to you timely. So, last question from Dr. Milind Kamble, Founder Chairman, Dalit Chamber of Commerce.
Very first, thank you, madam, for announcement of venture capital fund for scheduled tribe youth to address the aspirations. Another one is, madam, there is a lot of discussion on digital divide and the PM e-Vidya, which will definitely, it will bridge the gap of a digital divide, because there is so many tribal students in a far-flung area, youth, they are away from education in the pandemic, and near about 25% school dropout, and which lead to the child labor. So this will address this issue. One more thing, for these two things, I really thank you. And one more is a big booster dose for the economy is a PM Gati Shakti for a recovery and a growth that we will appreciate. And one more thing, madam, we are very eager, being a MSME sector, the scheme which is announced, RAM, which is exactly to the PLI scheme, or we want to hear more from you about RAM scheme, and it is a really required very much support for the MSME sector to boost rural economy and scheduled caste and scheduled tribe entrepreneurs. The hustle-free loans is the major issue, of course, to roll so many government schemes like Stand Up India. But recently we have signed a MOU with Mr. Khara, hope he will instruct to the bank managers for the hustle-free loan. One more request, madam, from Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana. The registration will end by this month. So we will request to extend one more year. Thank you, madam.
Your point's taken, Milind Kambleji. We'll come back to you on some of these suggestions.
Mr. Kamble, on RAMP scheme, and the budget has several others on the MSME sector, trying to bring in again that concept of better or easier credit facilitation in terms of their product lines, in terms of the skill set for the workers which are there. So a series of announcements are there, and this RAMP is now ready to be rolled out in this year itself. So the entire preparatory work has already happened.
Thank you everyone for such detailed discussion and enriching points on policy notes and critical issues. We have reached towards the conclusion of today's stakeholder interaction. To put it in a nutshell, today, Honorable Minister for Finance and Corporate Affairs has emphasized that budget is committed to transparency, growth, and continued investment in infrastructure to ensure greater multiplier effect. It lays the blueprint for Amrit Kal, that is how we would like to see ourselves in 2047. Several questions were asked from all the sectors of economy. Discussions centered on strengthening production-linked incentives for encouraging investment and domestic manufacturing, digital advancement and skill development across value chain, especially among women and women entrepreneurs, credit extension and increasing user-friendliness of banks, introductory new capital class and promoting blockchain. Needs of individual sectors were also raised. Lastly, towards the end, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Honorable Union Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs, every one of you for your valuable ideas and suggestions, and secretaries to Government of India in the Ministry of Finance, Chief Economic Advisor, and all other senior officials from the Ministry for such a fruitful discussion. Thank you all. I request you to please remember to take all your belongings while you leave. Thank you.